Well, hey everybody, this is Chris back again with the Ancient Scholar. I'm taking a little break from my studies. It's a Friday night. Got off of work a little late, went to the gym, got home, working on some projects for the toxicology of chemical weapons course I'm taking, and I'm also taking another course in biosecurity and microbial forensics. And boy, oh boy, we're having some discussions in that course. Of course, in response to current bio threats, specifically the Ebola issue. It's really a worldwide issue, but it's just recently become big in the headlines here in the United States. Now, I'm not a biosecurity specialist, so that's not something that I'm really going to talk about tonight. What I'd like to talk about tonight is nerve agents, specifically weaponized nerve agents. And the specific nerve agents that I'd like to talk about are the G agents, so-called the NATO designation GA. It was the first nerve agent, weaponized nerve agent made in Germany in the late 1920s, early 1930s. And the first A of those was a sarin, so it has a NATO code GA, and a taboon was the first, which is GA, and then sarin, GB, and et cetera, et cetera. So what I'd like to talk about is something that, when I was a soldier, always really perplexed me, and that was there was something called the nerve. What did they call it? It was a nerve pretreatment kit. And basically what you would do is, if you would find yourself in a situation where you might be exposed to nerve agents, you would take a medication called pyridostigmine. And this pyridostigmine was a medication that was supposed to improve your chances of surviving a nerve attack. And I thought, wow, that's really odd. What the hell is going on there? And of course, when I first learned this, I was about 17, and I joined the military, and I didn't have the foresight of a typical 17-year-old. So I really only cared about doing what I had to do to get through the rather traumatic experience of being a teenager and having to go through basic training and advanced individual training. So it wasn't until years later when I started looking at these particular issues through the eyes of a middle-aged dude who has an interest in pharmacology and is studying these things in more detail. So I think the question still remains, how in the hell's going on here? Well, let's talk a little bit about history. And the history of this whole pre-treatment regime of this pyridostigmine goes back to World War II. And in World War II, the Allies basically concluded the West, Great Britain, United States, Canada, Australia, other quote-unquote Western allies, and of course we had the Soviet Union. And toward the end of World War II, the United States and the Soviet Union basically were winning. We're pushing into Germany, and the Soviet Union was pushing Russia. Back then, USSR. Anyway, Soviet Union is pushing into one part of Germany. The Western Allies are pushing into another, and the Western Allies happened to come across plants, chemical weapons manufacturing plants that primarily produced agents like sarin. And so, of course, the United States took those plants over and repurposed that technology for their own good, if you will. And that is how our chemical weapons arsenal came to contain primarily, agents like sarin and tabun. Okay, so that's why sarin was a big part of our arsenal. Actually, it still is. We still have a lot of sarin stored, although per Geneva Convention rulings and some other international rulings, we're not supposed to use those agents. And to my knowledge, the United States has not ever used those particular agents. Well, the Soviet Union had pushed into another part of Germany and taken over chemical weapons manufacturing plants that produced different types of agents. They were all organic phosphorus agents, but the particular agent that was noteworthy is an agent known as soman. And the Soviet Union took over a plant, manufactured this soman, and actually, from what I understand, they actually tore this plant down in Germany piece by piece. And they tore this plant down and then reassembled it in the Soviet homeland piece by piece and began manufacturing this agent called soman, like the United States, and agents like sarin. Okay, so fair enough. Interesting story, right? Well, let's talk about what happened there. There's a difference in the physiochemical properties of something like sarin and something like soman. One of the big differences is in how bonding goes through a process known as aging in the acetylcholinesterase receptor active site. Both sarin and soman will undergo aging, and that is there's an initial covalent bond that occurs with, I believe, the serine residue in the active site, and I have some videos up on that you can see. But then additional covalent bonds can occur after a certain amount of time, and this is known as aging. And when these additional bonds occur, it is basically impossible to get that nerve agent out of the active site of the cholinesterase. And basically you have to wait for the body to manufacture more cholinesterase enzymes, which can take several weeks to even months in some cases. So aging is a bad deal, and if you want to treat somebody, you need to treat them before the aging occurs, or you're going to be dealing with a prolonged cholinergic crisis. Now sarin has aging it can take a couple hours for aging to occur with sarin. So you actually have a little bit of time if you're exposed to sarin. However, the Soviet agent, the soman, aging occurs in about 2 minutes. So this is markedly different from sarin. And if you get exposed to soman, you need to be treated pretty darn quickly. Oh, look at that. There's a hospital I worked at for several years in the emergency room before I went over to being a flight nurse, walking past the front of the hospital there. Some good and bad, mostly not so good memories, just because of we're only less than an hour away from Mexico, and when I first moved here, there was a lot of bad stuff that happened that came across the border, and a lot of violent stuff, a lot of desperate people, a lot of just terrible things I saw in that ER as a young new nurse, newly minted nurse. Okay, anyway, going back to our original conversation here. So yeah, if you get exposed to soman, it's a bum deal. If you aren't treated within a couple of minutes. Aging occurs, and basically you're dealing with prolonged side effects, prolonged effects of cholinesterase inhibition for, up to a couple months maybe. Okay, so there we go. So in the Cold War, there was a distinct possibility that if we ended up having some sort of chemical, what they called NBC, nuclear, biological, or chemical conflict with the Soviet Union, anyone like me who remembers the Cold War and remembers nuclear bomb drills and all that, that was a real possibility. So there was a possibility that you would be exposed to an agent like soman, where it had this really, really fast time that it would age in. The aging would occur very quickly, as opposed to something like sarin, where you had a little more time. So what we did is we said, you'll figure it out that the human body has a slight overabundance of cholinesterase. So what we did was we said, hey, what if we gave you a medication that would temporarily bind acetylcholinesterase, something like pyridostigmine, which is a carbamate, not nearly as toxic as the organic phosphorus agents. And in fact, pyridostigmine is used to treat certain neurological disorders like myasthenia gravis. Can occupy those receptors. So the thinking was that you would take this pyridostigmine, and pyridostigmine would block somewhere around 30% of your acetylcholinesterase in the body, and so you'd have about 70% of it was functional, and that's all you needed. Most people were okay. You didn't have significant side effects. You had an overabundance of cholinesterase, so no big deal, right? And then if you got exposed to the soman, what would happen was the soman would bind most of the other 70% of your receptors. You'd have an acute cholinergic crisis. It'd be a bum deal for you. You probably wouldn't receive treatment right away, or possibly. You'd have aging would occur, and then 70% of your cholinesterase would be taken out by the soman, and that would be a bum deal, except you had 30% of your receptors were bound by this reversible carbamate, and so you would treat that casualty like you would any other casualty, atropine, and the parlodoxine chloride probably wouldn't do a whole lot. Atropine and supportive care, anti-seizure medications, benzodiazepines, and possibly ventilatory support and beta agonists and all that. And then you'd wait, 8 hours or so, and you'd clear whatever nerve agent you had in your body, except for that was already bound. But you'd also clear the pyridostigmine from your cholinesterase receptors, and 30% of your cholinesterase would come back online after, about 8 hours or so. And so you'd have this cholinesterase that wasn't bound by nerve agent, and you would have an increased ability to survive that, because at least 30% of your cholinesterase was what would be functional after 8 hours or so. And so there was a chance that you'd have improved survivability, and you'd be able to get over that crisis a lot faster than having to be in a situation where you're receiving pretty extensive support for several weeks to months while your body manufactured more acetylcholinesterase enzymes. So that was the historical context behind this nerve agent pretreatment protocol that the United States military came up with. And it really had to do with the types of agents that you may have been exposed to if there was some sort of conflict with the Soviet Union. And so that was a rationale. So this nerve agent pretreatment is not going to be effective or as effective for other nerve agents where maybe this aging isn't as big of a deal. Certainly, when it comes to the carbamates, pre-treatment's not really going to do a whole lot of anything, because we know the carbamates are reversible, and you just kind of have to wait it out, and your acetylcholinesterase, you'll clear it from your acetylcholinesterase. You'll be doing okay. So there you go. Some history and some biochemistry and some toxicology and some chemical weapons all rolled up into a terrible, terribly filmed, terribly low fidelity, terribly presented discussion, but a discussion nonetheless. So with that, I'll let you guys go, and I hope you have a great evening. And as always, thanks for hanging in there.